The narrative begins by revealing a vast desert, surrounded by imposing mountains that rise like silent sentinels under a scorching sky, where the wind travels across the dunes, carrying with it fragments of forgotten stories and echoes of events that should never have happened. In this hostile setting, a deep, grave, almost supernatural voice breaks the silence, stating that upon those seemingly inert sands, there exists a hidden portal between heaven and hell, a point of convergence where natural laws are distorted and where death does not necessarily represent an end, but rather an uncertain and dangerous transition. According to the legends whispered by those who dare survive in that territory, an ancient brotherhood has watched over that place for generations, remaining in the shadows and acting far from the eyes of ordinary men, preventing the cursed after death from returning to torment the living. For such creatures do not rest, do not forget, and do not forgive. This is the true problem, as their existence turns the world into a constant cycle of suffering and persecution. As the voice fades, the scene slowly shifts, revealing a young inhabitant of the region performing a silent and disturbing ritual by pouring animal blood into a deep well, whose darkness seems to swallow the surrounding light. As the liquid runs down the inner walls, the young man becomes uneasy upon noticing, in the distance, the approach of a solitary rider, whose silhouette stands out against the intense glow of the horizon. Driven by a survival instinct, he abandons the place in haste, returning to his simple house and hiding in the basement, while the owner of the residence, a woman hardened by the hardships of life in that cruel environment, notices the approach and immediately grabs an axe, positioning herself cautiously at the door. When the rider finally arrives, the sound of the horse's hooves echoes sharply against the arid ground, and as he stops before her, it becomes visible that he carries an unconscious man on the mount, the body hanging inertly, as if already between life and death. Despite the evident tension, the woman shows that she recognizes the man, allowing his entry without resistance and guiding him to the shed, where the rider dismounts with precision and places the body on a wooden table. Without hesitation, without any display of doubt or emotion, he takes the axe and performs the brutal act of separating the head from the body, revealing not only his coldness but also his experience with it, as if it were a necessary and routine procedure in that distorted world. Immediately afterward, the narrative abruptly cuts to a disturbing scene where a woman is harassed by two malicious men whose cruelty highlights the moral degradation of that setting, reinforcing that danger comes not only from the dead, but also from the living. The sequence shifts again to an even more arid region, where a railway cuts through the desert like a metallic scar, and there a man waits, visibly tense, wearing an iron collar around his neck that indicates his submission to some cruel master, while in the background a dead tree holds hanging human remains, and crows feed without haste, creating a grotesque image that symbolizes the fate of those who fail in that world. After a few tension-filled minutes, three figures dressed in red approach on a creaking rail cart, led by a silent servant, and their garments suggest some kind of religious order or sect, but their weapons reveal that their faith is directly tied to violence. When they stop before the man, the leader immediately stands out, not only for his posture, but for his disturbing appearance, with a sewn mouth and unnatural eyes that reflect a complete absence of humanity. As he begins to speak, he questions the whereabouts of the man's companion, already knowing that there should be two, and upon receiving an evasive answer, he notices something out of place, realizing that there is one more horse than there should be. Pointing to the animal, he forces the man to recognize the mistake, and at that moment, the crows take flight abruptly, as if reacting to an invisible presence. Everyone turns their attention to the tree, where they discover the rider calmly seated, motionless and cunning. Then his name is revealed, Troy, a hunter of the undead, whose reputation had already crossed paths with those men. Upon remembering that he had already killed that leader before, it becomes evident that those present are no longer ordinary humans. Without giving room for negotiation, the confrontation begins, but it does not last, as Troy acts with devastating speed and precision, eliminating the three before they can properly react. The leader of the three, even while kneeling, tries to argue that the target Troy seeks will not be found, but his words are empty, and by claiming that God does not care about his actions, he reveals the distorted nature of his existence. Troy responds with absolute brutality, tearing out his spine and head with immense force, finishing what should no longer exist. He then makes it clear that in this world, only the removal of the head guarantees the definitive end of these creatures, establishing a fundamental rule for survival. The narrative then shifts to a village where prisoners are gathered under armed guard, while a priest tries to convince a sheriff of his value by presenting a tonic that he claims cures diseases and wards off the undead. Among the captives is Jenny, who awakens chained but immediately demonstrates an unusual strength of spirit by resisting the advances of one of the guards, stealing his blade and asserting herself, drawing the attention of Fabulos, who observes her stance with interest and caution, recognizing that she is not just another victim in that scenario. After hours of waiting, when everything seems to be heading toward an inevitable execution, gunshots suddenly echo and Troy appears atop a rock, eliminating the lawman with precision. Amid the chaos, he frees Fabulos with calculated shots, allowing him to escape, while the other prisoners are recaptured, including Jenny, creating a separation that drives the continuation of events. Minutes later, Fabulos finds Troy and expresses his gratitude, acknowledging that he is now in debt, and when he asks how he can repay him, he is told that the hunter already knows what he will ask, thus establishing a partnership based on interest and necessity. In the background, the prisoners are taken to an isolated place where a sect prepares a ritual they call divine justice. Upon arrival, the environment reveals itself to be even more oppressive, with tents set up in an improvised manner and an atmosphere heavy with fanaticism and restrained violence. The spiritual leader of that group, a pastor with a stern gaze and calculated words, orders those considered pure to pray for the souls of those about to be sacrificed, claiming that the act is not cruelty, but purification, an attempt to free them from eternal torment. As these words echo among the followers, the prisoners are brought before a man who introduces himself as Gaza, a sheriff who claims to have been consecrated by God to assist that sect in the mission of purifying the land, and his demeanor conveys not compassion, but distorted conviction, as if he truly believes that the death of those individuals is an act of mercy. By declaring that their deaths will be sacrifices that will bring a blessing, he reveals the fanatical nature of his leadership. But Jenny, recognizing in him a man marked by past sins, confronts him without hesitation, insulting him and exposing his hypocrisy. Gaza, unfazed, states that he is no longer who he once was, saying that he now acts under divine orders, while the priest tries to intervene, asking for a fair judgment, but Gaza ends any discussion by declaring that his word is the only law in that place. Meanwhile, inside one of the tents, a muscular man whose skin shows grotesque deformities, as if it had been imperfectly reconstructed, demands that a servant bring him clothes, demonstrating impatience and authority. But as the servant walks away, he is ambushed by a female undead who emerges from the shadows and attacks him violently, using sharp blades to disfigure him before tearing off his face. She then delivers the skin as a mask to the man, who wears it without hesitation, assuming a new disturbing appearance, and at that moment he is identified as Kanza, a central figure in that horror scenario. Upon leaving the tent with his new face, he and his companion begin a systematic massacre against the lawmen present, eliminating them with brutality and efficiency, as if they were already accustomed to violence, and when it all ends, he summons other undead, revealing that he has control over those creatures. Hours later, Troy arrives at a village that is now completely destroyed, with burned buildings, broken doors, and an unsettling silence that reveals the absence of life. Fabulos, who accompanies him, seeks answers in the face of that devastated scene, but Troy offers no explanations, only hands him a belt with a weapon, as if preparing him for something inevitable. As he steps back, trying to understand the situation, the young man ends up falling into a hidden compartment in the ground, being immediately isolated when Troy closes the entrance above him, leaving him alone in a dark and narrow underground corridor where the air is heavy and every sound echoes intensely. In this claustrophobic environment, a distant noise draws his attention, growing gradually until an undead suddenly appears, advancing aggressively. In a survival reflex, Fabulos fires, hitting the creature and knocking it down, but the tension does not ease, as the environment suggests that this is not the only danger present. Soon, Troy reappears through a side passage, observing the young man's performance and instructing him to use his left hand as part of a practical and cruel training. When Troy leaves, the undead rises again, demonstrating the persistence of these creatures, and Fabulos, now more attentive, reacts with greater precision, firing again and finishing the enemy, consolidating a forced learning through experience. Upon returning to the surface, he reunites with Troy, who hands him some coins as immediate payment, stating that there will be more rewards at the end of the job, reinforcing the transactional nature of that partnership. Even so, Fabulos agrees to continue, but questions what drives Troy to hunt those abominations with such determination. It is then that the hunter reveals fragments of his past, explaining that everything began with a woman considered impure, who became pregnant during a moment of extreme hardship, being taken in by a group known as the Consecrated Sisters, guardians of the secrets of death. Since it was not a suitable environment for a child, she sent him to an orphanage, where he grew up without bonds until he was expelled at the age of 13, being forced to survive alone until he was taken in by a widow who raised him alongside her daughter, allowing him to experience for the first time a sense of belonging. Over time, the affection between him and the young woman turned into love, creating a connection that seemed capable of withstanding the world around them. In a moment of carelessness, he allowed her to go out alone, and at that instant, cruel men found her, subjecting her to violence and humiliation, resulting in a deep trauma that culminated in the birth of a child. Unable to cope with the pain and guilt, he left, returning only years later to discover that she had died during childbirth, leaving only the unwanted child. This loss consumed him completely, leading him to seek revenge against all those responsible, invading an isolated prison where he eliminated each one of them, including Kanza and his men, without knowing that this act would trigger consequences that would go beyond the world of the living. Back in the present, while Troy and Fabulos continue their journey, Kanza and his followers spread terror in the tents, killing people and tearing off their faces to hide their deformities, revealing a sick obsession with appearance and identity. Kanza declares that he is seeking a blessing for his son, whose form is revealed as a body tied to a triangular structure, wrapped in cloth like a preserved corpse. By demanding answers about the whereabouts of the Consecrated Sisters, he shows that his motivation is not only power, but also desperation. When he does not get answers, he orders the execution of the prisoners, intensifying the atmosphere of terror. Meanwhile, at another point, Troy returns to the house from the beginning, accompanied by Fabulos, being received by the owner of the residence, who shows that she has known him for a long time, suggesting a shared past. By offering help against the enemies, she shows a willingness to fight, but Troy refuses, stating that she cannot participate, which raises questions about her limitations. When confronted about his constant departures in search of the leader of the undead, he remains silent, keeping his objectives hidden. Meanwhile, in the tents, one of the undead uses lizard skin as a mask while taking care of Kanza's son's body, observing it with disturbing fascination, as if seeing beauty in what should only be death, reinforcing the distorted state of perception that dominates those creatures. At that same moment, the captured priest is taken to Kanza, and one of the leader's henchmen rummages through his clothes with brutality, until he finds an old map, worn by time but still legible enough to reveal the location they sought. Upon identifying the destination, Kanza shows immediate interest, as if he were finally close to achieving his goal. Before he can deepen his analysis, the man from the beginning, the one who had survived the encounter with Troy, returns wounded and exhausted, bringing with him the head of the sewn-mouthed man, throwing it to the ground as proof that they had been intercepted. When he reports what happened, he mentions the presence of a hunter, which makes Kanza immediately associate the description with Troy, awakening an intense fury that manifests in his posture and voice. Without hesitation, he orders his strongest warrior to gather some of the undead and immediately set out to hunt the responsible one, demanding that they bring him back or destroy him completely, demonstrating that the confrontation between the two sides is now inevitable. Hours later, back at the house of the woman who knows Troy, the environment seems momentarily calmer, but this false sense is quickly broken when she, visibly intoxicated, is supported by Phoblos to the animal's watering place. At that moment of vulnerability, an undead silently emerges from the shadows, advancing toward them, but before it can complete the attack, its head is destroyed by a precise shot from Troy's weapon, who carefully observes any suspicious movement. It soon becomes evident that it was not an isolated attack, as signs of approaching enemies begin to appear around the property, indicating that the group sent by Kanza is already close. Without wasting time, Troy prepares for the confrontation, moving toward his opponents with determination, while inside the house, Phoblos takes responsibility for protecting the family, facing the followers of the undead who try to invade the place. At that moment, a sandstorm begins to form, growing rapidly until it envelops the entire region, drastically reducing visibility and creating a chaotic environment where every movement can be fatal. Even under these adverse conditions, Troy advances among the silhouettes distorted by the sand, facing his enemies with lethal precision, while Phoblos struggles to keep the invaders at bay, demonstrating growth in his skills but still dealing with clear limitations. Suddenly, a masked figure bursts into the shed, moving aggressively toward the boy, and Phoblos tries to intercept him, but ends up being struck and wounded, becoming vulnerable to the final attack. When all seems lost, Troy appears once again, drawing the creature's attention and diverting its focus, initiating a direct confrontation that quickly intensifies, with blows and rapid movements that demonstrate the hunter's experience. Using the environment to his advantage, he manages to trap the enemy in chains attached to the ceiling, but the creature's weight breaks the structure, causing both to fall to the lower level, where an old guillotine remains forgotten. Realizing the opportunity, Troy guides the fight until he positions the enemy under the blade, activating the mechanism at the exact moment and decapitating the creature definitively, ending the confrontation with brutal efficiency. After ensuring that there are no more immediate threats, he goes out to check the bodies scattered across the desert, but at that moment, from the debris, the undead creature that survived due to wearing the iron mask emerges. It advances with fury and determination toward the hunter. Despite the threat, Troy remains calm, assessing the situation. Before he can act, the boy who was being protected uses an improvised sling and throws a stone with precision at the monster's head, knocking it to the ground and creating an opening for Troy to finish the attack, demonstrating that even the most unexpected can influence the outcome of a confrontation. After the fight, Phoblos approaches, trying to understand whether that encounter represented the expected confrontation with the main enemy, but Troy remains cold, indicating that he has not yet found his true target. Upon noticing that the young man is gravely wounded, he makes a harsh decision, drawing his weapon and executing Phoblos with a direct shot, surprising everyone who witnesses the act, but revealing a logic of his own, for immediately afterward, he takes the body to an isolated area in the desert, where he carefully places it and waits, in silence, for the moment when the body will begin to move again, revealing that his action was not motivated by cruelty, but by knowledge of the rules of that world. Troy watches Phobulos's body until it finally rises again, now transformed, trapped in the same cycle that defines his own existence. The narrative dives into a flashback that shows the moment when Troy, after fulfilling his revenge, is surprised by one of Kanza's henchmen, who arrives at the prison and shoots him, critically wounding him. Hours later, already in the desert, he falls from his horse, weakened and without strength to continue, accepting death as an inevitable fate. At that moment, his mother, a member of the consecrated sisters, finds him and refuses to allow him to die, invoking an entity linked to death, demanding that her son's life be restored. The entity accepts but imposes a price, soul for soul, declaring that all those Troy killed will return to hunt him, and without hesitation, the woman offers her own life in exchange, sealing the pact. Then, with the hunter's resurrection, the criminals he had previously destroyed return to life as living undead, as well as all those he killed in his quest for revenge. At another point in the narrative, on the mountain indicated by the map, Kamza continues his journey, keeping Jenny under his control while his followers dig in search of the entrance to the sanctuary of the consecrated sisters. After a landslide, the entrance is finally revealed, allowing him to advance into the cave, while his servant watches him with a mixture of devotion and jealousy. Inside the place, ancient columns covered with unknown symbols rise around them, bearing inscriptions in a language that few can understand. But one of the servants manages to decipher part of the content, indicating that they are close to something significant. Kansa then takes his son's body to a deeper area of the cave, determined to complete his objective, while at the entrance his servant remains on guard until Troy finally arrives at the place. When they meet, she proposes a worthy duel, which he accepts, both choosing pistols as weapons, but breaking the agreement she throws a knife at him, trying to gain an advantage. Troy reacts quickly, dodging the attack and firing with precision, hitting her forehead and ending the duel. After that, he climbs to the top of the mountain, where he finds a dead creature tied to a stone altar, while beside it, Jenny screams as she is attacked by another undead. But Troy eliminates the aggressor with a precise shot. At that moment, Kanza appears and shoots at him, hitting him and causing his weapon to fall. With a momentary advantage, he demands to know how all those Troy killed returned, while his son did not have the same fate. Before he can execute the hunter, Fabulos reappears, now transformed, interrupting the scene and proposing a fair duel, handing the weapon to Troy and stepping back to watch. Facing his greatest enemy, the one responsible for the loss of everything he once had, Troy does not hesitate, firing faster and hitting Kanza in the forehead, leaving him on the brink of death. In his final moments, Kanza understands that his son did not return because he was already dead before the moment he should have been saved, and this realization destroys him internally, but does not change his fate. Then Troy approaches, grabs his head, and rips it off with force, definitively ending the cycle of revenge. In the final sequence, he destroys what remained of Kanza's son's body, preventing any possibility of return, and leaves carrying his enemy's head as proof of his victory. While in the background, Fabulos remains in his new form, trapped between two worlds, and Jenny, marked by everything she has lived through, slowly approaches him, asking him to become her savior, leaving open the future of those who still remain in that world where death is never truly the end.